A woman opened the door to her Florida home, and what she saw made her heart stop. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He was cheating with her daughter. And just moments later, that woman would never make it out of that house alive. Now pause. Think about that. A mother, a daughter, a husband, a house full of secrets. One deadly night. What really happened in that house? And why did it end in blood? Before we unravel this chilling true crime story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you think betrayal is the most dangerous crime of all. Let's go back to where it all began. Janelle Harris was a Florida mother of two. She had warm brown eyes, a contagious laugh, and a heart that forgave too easily. Her friends used to joke that she was too soft for this world. But Janelle didn't care. She believed in love, in second chances, even in third ones. She married Terrence Jackson, a man everyone in their Miami neighborhood called T, when she was just 24. T had that slick charm. The way he talked could make you feel like you were the only person in the room. He wasn't rich, not by any means, but he always found a way to make things happen. Hustle was his middle name. They weren't perfect, not by a long shot. T had a history. A criminal one. Drug charges, petty theft, a few sealed records. But he swore he was done with all that. He promised Janelle they'd build a life together, the kind they never had growing up. And for a while, it worked. They had two kids. A son named Marcus, and a daughter named Tamia. Tamia was Janelle's shadow. As a little girl, she'd sit and watch her mama do her hair in the mirror and whisper, "I want to be just like you." But something started to change when Tamia turned 14. She got quiet, distant, and angry. Janelle thought it was just teenage mood swings, hormones, boys, the usual. But it was more than that. Something dark was brewing inside that house, and Janelle didn't even know it. Terrence had always been more of a cool dad. The one who let them stay up late, watch scary movies, even sip a little wine on holidays. But with Tamia, he was extra close. He gave her money behind Janelle's back, bought her expensive gifts, and always defended her when she got in trouble. "Stop babying her," Janelle would snap. "She needs boundaries." "She's just like you," Terrence would smile. "She's got fire. Let her burn." But there was a look in his eye when he said that, something Janelle couldn't quite name. By the time Tamia turned 16, things were spiraling. She started skipping school, lying, coming home late. And one day, Janelle found a lace thong in her daughter's backpack, with the tag still on. When she confronted her, Tamia just stared at her and said, "You don't know me." It broke Janelle. She thought maybe she had failed as a mother. Maybe she had focused too much on Terrence. Maybe she had missed the signs. But the truth? The truth was too evil to imagine. Neighbors began whispering. They'd seen Tamia getting into T's car during school hours. Sometimes late at night. Once, a woman down the street swore she saw them kissing, but she didn't want to believe her own eyes. She told herself, maybe it was just a hug. Maybe I imagined it. But the whispers got louder, and Janelle started to listen. One night, while T was in the shower, Janelle went through his phone. What she found made her skin crawl. Text messages, late night calls, explicit photos. But the name saved in the phone? Peaches. It wasn't until she clicked on the contact and saw the number that her knees buckled. It was Tamia's number. That night, Janelle didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, staring at the front door, holding a kitchen knife. How do you confront your husband when the betrayal isn't just infidelity, but incest? How do you look your daughter in the face when she's been calling your husband daddy in more ways than one? The next morning, Janelle sent Marcus to stay with her sister. She told him she needed a weekend to clear her head. But the truth? She needed to face this demon. Alone. When Terrence got home that evening, Janelle was waiting. "What's this?" she asked, tossing the phone on the table. T looked at the screen. Didn't flinch. "You went through my phone?" he said, calm as a winter breeze. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Janelle's voice cracked. Tell me right now, or I swear to God. And then came a silence so thick, you could feel it in your chest. She's not a little girl anymore, T said. And she came to me. Janelle's scream could be heard 2 houses down. She lunged at him, claws out, tears burning her cheeks. You're sick. You're sick. But what she didn't know was that Tamia was already in the house. She had been hiding in the bedroom, listening. And when she stepped out, what she was holding in her hand would turn a family argument into a crime scene. If you're still watching, pause for a moment. What would you do if the people you loved the most betrayed you in the darkest way? Would you fight? Would you run? Or would you become something else? Midway reminder, if you've made it this far, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another real-life horror story like this one. Because what's coming next, no one saw it coming. Tamia was holding a hammer. Janelle turned, eyes wide. Tamia, put that down. I told you not to mess with us, Tamia whispered. Us? Janelle cried. He's your father. No, Tamia said. He's mine. And you ruined everything. The scream that followed was short, and by the time the neighbors called the police, it was too late. Janelle Harris was already gone. And the story? It had just begun. Comment below, what would you have done in Janelle's shoes? And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you think this story needs to be heard. Because sometimes, family is the most dangerous place of all. Blood was on the walls. The neighbors who heard the scream rushed over too late. All they found was the broken body of Janelle Harris lying in the living room, and Tamia standing above her, hammer still clutched in her trembling hand. Terrence? He was nowhere to be found. And Tamia? She didn't run. She just stood there, quiet, blank-faced, like she didn't understand what she had done. Like the horror hadn't even reached her yet. What turned this once-loving teenage girl into something so cold, so hollow? Let's go back, because this story, it's even more twisted than we thought. Tamia had always been different. Even as a child, she was quiet, watchful. Her teachers used to say she was smart but distant. She kept to herself, didn't have many friends. But she was obsessed with Terrence. Most little girls are close to their dads, but this was different. If Terrence was in the room, Tamia's eyes never left him. When he left for work, she'd cry like he was never coming back. And when he came home, she'd sit in his lap for hours, even into her teen years. Janelle had seen it, but she chalked it up to a daddy's girl face. Something innocent, something sweet. But Terrence had known better. Because he wasn't Tamia's biological father. That was the hidden truth. Tamia was from a previous relationship, one Janelle barely spoke about. Her real father had been violent, abusive, and long gone before she turned 2. Terrence stepped in, raised her like his own, and legally adopted her when she was 10. But to Tamia, Terrence was her father, and more. It started with the small things. Late-night talks in her bedroom. Secrets they kept from Janelle. Then came the photos. Nothing too revealing at first, just Tamia in makeup, in outfits she had no business wearing at 16. But Terrence praised her. You're becoming a woman, he'd say. You're beautiful. And Tamia, starved for attention, believed every word. She began to see Janelle not as a mother, but as a rival. Every argument between them pushed her closer to Terrence. And he fed that fire. Told her she was misunderstood. That her mother didn't see her. That she deserved more. But more of what? That answer would come during one weekend when Janelle took Marcus to visit her sister in Jacksonville. Tamia stayed behind with Terrence, claiming she had exams to study for. That weekend changed everything. Tamia returned to school withdrawn. Her grades dropped. She began wearing baggy clothes and stopped doing her hair. But no one asked questions. Not her teachers. Not her friends. Not even Janelle. And Terrence? He acted like nothing had happened. Until the signs became impossible to ignore. Whispers circled the school. Tamia had been seen crying in the bathroom. She stopped attending after-school clubs. Her phone had a lock on it Janelle didn't recognize. Then came the bruises, a small one under her arm, another near her collarbone. Where did you get that? Janelle asked. Tamia shrugged. basketball. But she wasn't even on the team. Still, Janelle tried to believe her. She wanted to believe her. Because what mother wants to imagine that the man she loves could be hurting her child, and that the child might love him back? But when she found the messages, the ones we mentioned before, her world cracked in half. Now, police were swarming her home. Tamia was arrested on the spot. She didn't resist, didn't cry. She just asked, "Can I go to sleep now?" The officers who took her in said she looked dazed. Like she was in a trance. Like something inside her had already died. But it was the interrogation that turned this into a case the detectives would never forget. Tamia confessed to everything. Said she had been in love with Terrence for 2 years. Said her mother had tried to ruin it. Said that Terrence told her they could be together if her mother was gone. Those words silenced the room. Was this a manipulation? A grooming so deep it rewired her brain? Or was Tamia responsible for the darkest kind of betrayal, killing her own mother for a forbidden love? Detectives immediately issued a warrant for Terrence. But he was gone. Vanished. No work. No bank activity. No calls. He didn't even take his clothes. Just his car, and the secrets that now haunted everyone who knew the Harris family. What happened that night was more than murder. It was the final act of a story soaked in lies, abuse, and manipulation. And it was only the beginning of the investigation. The media caught wind of the case. Florida teen murders mother in alleged affair with stepdad, the headlines read. And overnight, everyone had an opinion. Some blamed Tamia. Some blamed Janelle. But most blamed Terrence. Still, without his capture, there could be no trial. No justice. No truth. And the questions only got louder. Where was Terrence? Did he plan this? Was he watching from somewhere, proud of what he'd done? Or was he closer than anyone realized? Detectives soon found a gas station camera showing Terrence's car leaving Miami, heading north. But where was he going? Who was he going to see? And most terrifying of all, was he planning to come back for Tamia? By now, Marcus had been placed with extended family. A boy who lost both his parents in one night, one to murder and one to madness. The entire family was broken. And Terrence Jackson had become one of the most hunted fugitives in Florida. This story was now national news. And people wanted answers. But before those answers came, another twist would rock the case wide open. 2 weeks after the murder, a woman walked into a sheriff's department in South Carolina, claiming she had information about a wanted man. She said she had been dating someone named Tony R. A man with a silver tongue, a Miami accent, and a photo of Tamia in his wallet. The man was Terrence. He had been hiding in plain sight, under a fake name, with a new job, a new life. And that woman? She was 7 months pregnant. Terrence hadn't just run. He had already started replacing the life he destroyed. The question now was, would the law catch him before someone else did? Let us know what you think in the comments. Was Tamia a victim? Or a willing accomplice? And what punishment does a man like Terrence truly deserve? We're only getting started. Terrence Jackson was living like a ghost. 3 states away from the bloodied living room in Miami, he was now calling himself Tony Rivers, claiming to be a construction foreman from New Orleans. He'd grown out his beard, changed his license plates, and rented a small 2-bedroom apartment outside Charleston, South Carolina. But behind the fake name and fresh start was a man who had manipulated a teenage girl into turning on her own mother. And now, he was preparing to become a father again, with another woman. Earlier, we learned that a woman had walked into a sheriff's department claiming her boyfriend might be the man the whole country was looking for. Her name was Shonda Mitchell, and she was a single mother of 1, 7 months pregnant with her second. She met Tony at a laundromat. He was kind, offered to help her carry her baskets, said he knew what it was like to raise a child alone, claimed he'd lost a son years ago in a custody battle. Shonda, tired of being alone, let him into her life. Within 2 weeks, he was staying over, helping with her daughter, cooking dinner. But it wasn't just the speed that raised questions, it was the way he treated her kid. Too affectionate, too touchy, always brushing her hair, calling her princess. And then there was the wallet. One night, while looking for loose change, Shonda found a folded photo in the back pocket of his jeans. It was a girl. Brown skin, long braids, standing in front of a high school building. Written on the back were the words, "Forever." She didn't recognize the girl. And when she asked Tony who she was, he brushed it off. Old family. Niece or something. But Shonda knew better. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed up, searching news reports. Plugged the photo into Google Lens. And then there it was. Tamia Harris, 16. Charged with the murder of her mother, Janelle Harris, in Miami. Story dated 2 weeks prior. But what made Shonda's stomach turn wasn't the murder. It was the name listed as the missing suspect, Terrence Jackson. And when she zoomed in on the picture from the crime report, she realized she had been sleeping next to a killer. That's when she made the call. Authorities moved fast. They tracked his phone, his car, and surrounded the apartment at 4:42 a.m. No lights. No sirens. Just a quiet knock. Inside, Terrence was already at the door. He didn't run. Didn't scream. He just looked up and said, "Took you long enough." But what happened next stunned even the detectives. Once in custody, Terrence began to talk. Not to deny it, but to explain it. He claimed Tamia had fallen in love with him, that she had seduced him, that Janelle had turned her against him, and they had acted out of passion. It was a performance. Calculated. Cold. But the more he talked, the more cracks appeared. He slipped up. Mentioned details only someone at the scene would know. Details that Tamia never told investigators. Like the angle of the first blow. The color of the knife Janelle had in her hand. The fact that he, not Tamia, had hidden the murder weapon in a neighbor's trash bin. That's when detectives realized something chilling. Tamia didn't kill Janelle alone. She may not have even landed the first blow. She was just the one holding the hammer when the police arrived. Now, everything shifted. This wasn't a simple case of teen-on-parent violence. This was premeditated, orchestrated, and carried out by a grown man who had been grooming a child for years, until she became his weapon. Back in Miami, the news of Terrence's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Janelle's sister, Denise, gave a tearful interview outside the courthouse. "He took everything from us. My sister, my niece, my nephew's future. And for what? For control? For lust? He's not a man. He's a monster." The prosecution now had enough to charge Terrence with conspiracy to commit murder, statutory rape, and multiple counts of child endangerment. But that wasn't the only fallout. With the truth about the manipulation exposed, Tamia's legal team pushed for a new defense. They argued that Tamia was not a cold-blooded killer, but a mentally broken child victim, groomed by her stepfather, coerced into violence after years of psychological abuse. They brought in psychologists, trauma experts, and case studies on coercive control. And slowly, public opinion began to shift. The same people who once saw Tamia as a monster now saw a frightened girl who had been failed by everyone around her. The case was now bigger than one murder. It was about what happens when abuse hides in plain sight. And how sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask, it wears a wedding ring, stands in your kitchen, and calls your children baby girl. Tamia was moved from juvenile detention to a psychiatric facility pending re-evaluation. Terrence was denied bail. And Marcus, now only 10, was stuck in the middle of a story no child should ever be part of. But just when it seemed like the worst was over, a new twist exploded the case all over again. While sorting through Terrence's old storage unit in Florida, detectives found a locked box. Inside were dozens of letters, photos, VHS tapes, all labeled with Tamia's name. But they weren't from the last 2 years. They went back to when she was 11. The abuse had started far earlier than anyone thought. Tamia never stood a chance. Which raised one last burning question. Did Janelle know? And if she did, why didn't she leave? That's what we'll be uncovering next. Before we move on, drop your thoughts in the comments. At what age should someone be held fully accountable for murder if they've been manipulated their whole life? Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this story if you believe more people need to understand how real grooming looks. When detectives opened that box from Terrence's old storage unit, what they found didn't just crack the case, it shattered it. Inside were handwritten letters, some stained with old tears, others sealed with glitter stickers like something out of a child's diary. Dozens of VHS tapes with dates scrawled across them. A few labeled T+T, practice, and one, simply, her first time. This wasn't just evidence of a crime. This was a collection. A sick, twisted archive of abuse, manipulation, and trauma that had been happening right under Janelle's roof for years. The tapes went back further than anyone imagined, starting when Tamia was just 11 years old. The police didn't even know where to begin. One of the officers who reviewed the tapes threw up in the middle of the viewing room. Another walked out and never returned to the case. But the most devastating part? Tamia didn't remember half of what was on those tapes. She had buried it, forgotten it, or maybe she had been forced to forget. In earlier scenes from this story, we saw Tamia described as a quiet, withdrawn girl with sudden mood swings. What nobody realized at the time was that those moods were symptoms of trauma. Her rebellion wasn't random, it was a scream for help that no one knew how to hear. So now the story shifted again. Was Tamia ever truly guilty? Or was she a child made to believe that abuse was love, and that love was something you had to protect, no matter the cost? Investigators re-examined every moment between Tamia and Terrence. Every time they were alone. Every time she defended him, even when it didn't make sense. Every time she stood between him and her mother. But the most heartbreaking discovery came in the form of one letter Janelle had written but never sent. It was found tucked between an old Bible and a stack of photo albums. The letter was addressed to Denise, Janelle's sister. Dated 2 years before her death. I think something's wrong between Tamia and Terrence. I've seen the way he looks at her. The way she walks around like she's in some kind of trance. I tried to talk to her once, but she shut down. I asked him about it and he flipped, said I was being paranoid. But my gut won't leave me alone. I'm scared not of him hurting me, but of losing my daughter to him. Please don't tell anyone yet. I need to figure this out. That single paragraph changed everything, because it proved that Janelle knew. She saw the signs. She feared what was happening, but she didn't act. And that brings us to the most difficult question of all. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she take Tamia and Marcus and run the moment she suspected? The answer is one that so many women, especially black women, know all too well. Fear, guilt, shame, and survival. Janelle had no savings, no family nearby, no legal proof, and she lived in a system where black women are too often ignored, too often judged, too often told they're overreacting. She stayed not because she didn't care. She stayed because she didn't think she had a choice. But by the time she was ready to act, it was already too late. With the discovery of the tapes and letters, Tamia's case was reopened. Her attorneys filed for her charges to be reduced from murder to manslaughter and sought to have her tried as a minor, not an adult. The goal wasn't to get her off free, but to get her help. Therapists and trauma specialists agreed. Tamia had been under psychological control for most of her life. She hadn't even known she was being abused. She believed she was in love. And that's the darkest part. Terrence didn't just steal her childhood. He stole her understanding of right and wrong. He programmed her like a machine, only to send her into battle against the very woman who tried to save her. Public support for Tamia began to grow. Advocacy groups rallied behind her. Online petitions demanded a fair trial. Even jurors from other abuse cases wrote letters urging the court to consider her past. But not everyone agreed. Some believed Tamia still made a choice. That even manipulation has its limits. That she knew what she was doing when she raised that hammer and struck her mother down. And so, the courtroom became a battlefield. On one side, a teenage girl shattered by abuse. On the other, the question of justice for Janelle. And all the while, Terrence sat in his jail cell, smiling, refusing to testify. He told reporters, "They both loved me. That's not a crime." But what happened next finally wiped that smile off his face. An anonymous tip came into the DA's office, someone claiming to have a daughter who also had a relationship with Terrence back when he was living in Atlanta. The caller didn't give her name, just said, "He did it to us too. I have the proof." Detectives traced the call to a woman named Alondra. She had a daughter, 16, who had known Terrence when he lived in Georgia during a brief separation from Janelle 4 years earlier. The daughter, Kayla, was now in therapy. But what she told authorities echoed Tamia's story almost exactly. The grooming, the gifts, the secrets. And just like Tamia, she thought he was her only one. With this new victim, the prosecution now had the ultimate weapon, a pattern, a predator. A man who had been doing this for years in different cities, under different names, with different girls, all too young to know better. Now, not only was Terrence facing life for murder and child exploitation, but new charges were stacking up across multiple states. And suddenly it wasn't just about Janelle anymore. It was about every girl Terrence had touched, every family he'd torn apart, every mother who never got to write that final letter. The trial was set. The country watched. And Tamia still didn't remember half of what he'd done to her. But one final surprise was still hiding in plain sight. A detail that everyone missed. And it was about to turn this case upside down again. We'll uncover it soon. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this story with someone who thinks they've seen it all. Because this case? It's just getting started. Terrence Jackson had always been one step ahead. Even behind bars, even with new victims coming forward, even with hours of video evidence stacked against him, he never flinched. It was like he knew something no one else did. And he did. Because buried deep in the files, in one of the VHS tapes labeled Practice, was a 14-second clip that no one had reviewed closely. It didn't look like much, grainy footage, shot at an angle, Tamia standing nervously by the front door. Terrence walks in, hugs her. Says something no one could hear clearly at first. But then, a tech-enhanced version of the audio picked up a whisper. Terrence leaned in and said, "If she ever finds out, you know what we talked about. You do it first." And just like that, the case flipped. This wasn't just a man who groomed a girl. This was a man who trained her to kill. Earlier in the story, we explored how Tamia believed she was in love, that what happened between her and Terrence was something she chose. But now, this tiny clip revealed something even darker. She had been coached for this moment. Over time. Over years. What everyone thought was an act of passion was actually the end of a long, manipulative plan. Terrence knew Janelle was getting suspicious. He knew she had found the texts. He knew the truth would eventually surface. So, he turned Tamia into the fall girl. Made her believe that if Janelle ever tried to take him away, she had to stop her. Not protect him, eliminate her. This revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Tamia's legal team filed immediately to suppress her confession, arguing that her entire mental framework had been built by Terrence's manipulation. Psychologists testified that Tamia had been exhibiting signs of something called trauma bonding. It's when a victim forms a strong emotional attachment to their abuser, usually under conditions of fear, dependence, and control. It explained everything. Why she stayed. Why she believed him. Why she raised the hammer. And why she never cried. Because in her mind, she wasn't committing a crime. She was protecting the only person who had ever made her feel wanted. Still, the jury was divided. Was Tamia a puppet? Or was she a partner? Meanwhile, Terrence sat in the courtroom like it was a movie premiere. Smirking. Whispering to his defense attorney. Watching Tamia with those same eyes he had used to manipulate her since she was a little girl. And then came the moment no one expected. The prosecution called a surprise witness. Not a family member. Not a friend. Not even a victim. It was a prison informant. A man who shared a cell with Terrence for 48 hours before his transfer. He claimed Terrence bragged about the murder. That he said Tamia was his masterpiece. That he used to write out fake letters pretending to be Tamia, practicing how she'd sound in court. But most shocking of all, the informant said Terrence planned to manipulate more girls once he got out. That he didn't think he'd get life. That he had a plan to plead insanity, serve a few years in a psych unit, and start over in another state. This wasn't just sick. It was evil with a blueprint. And finally, after months of hearings, interviews, and public outrage, the court reached a decision. Tamia would not be charged as an adult. Her murder charge was reduced to involuntary manslaughter. She would serve time in a state psychiatric rehabilitation center until she turned 21, under constant evaluation and therapy. The judge said, "This child was broken before she ever held a weapon, and it is this court's belief that she deserves healing, not execution." The courtroom was split in two. Some cried in relief, others in anger. Janelle's sister, Denise, stood up and said, "We lost my sister, but we already lost Tamia a long time ago. The real criminal is the man who turned them against each other." And then came Terrence's sentencing. Life without parole, plus an additional 60 years for statutory rape, child endangerment, and crossing state lines to engage in sexual acts with a minor. When the judge read the verdict, Terrence finally dropped the mask. He stood up, eyes wild, screaming, "You think this ends here? She'll come back to me. They always do." Security had to drag him out of the courtroom. Tamia didn't even look up. She just sat there, clutching a photo of her mother, and whispering, "I'm sorry." But as the dust settled, a final bombshell dropped that would change the legacy of this case forever. Because a new DNA test, one done during routine psychiatric intake, revealed something no one was expecting. Terrence Jackson was Tamia's biological father. Janelle had lied. The man she said abandoned them when Tamia was 2? That was Terrence. She had taken him back years later, when Tamia was too young to remember him. He re-entered their lives under a different name, claimed to be someone else, said he changed. Janelle had known the truth all along. She just didn't tell anyone, not even her daughter. And that lie, buried deep in shame, silence, and fear, became the seed of a tragedy that destroyed 3 generations of one family. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Would knowing the truth about her father have saved Tamia? And how many other families are sitting on secrets that could destroy them? Tamia sat alone in her room at the state psychiatric facility. No phone, no TV, just 4 gray walls, 1 small window, and a mirror she couldn't look into. She now knew everything. That Terrence was her real father. That her mother had lied for years to protect her from a man she let back into their lives. And that lie? It had cost them everything. Back in the courtroom, the revelation about her paternity had hit like an explosion. You could feel the breath get sucked out of the room. Everyone was too stunned to speak, except Denise. She stood in the hallway outside the courthouse, gripping her coat, shaking her head. "My sister protected a secret that ended up destroying her. I don't even know what's real anymore." Earlier in this case, we were led to believe that Janelle had been a victim of Terrence's manipulation, just like Tamia. But this new truth raised uncomfortable questions. Why would she bring a man like Terrence back into her home? Why let him raise a daughter he once abandoned? Why lie to her daughter about who her father really was? Those closest to Janelle believe she was trying to rewrite the past. That after years of being a single mother, struggling to provide, dealing with shame, judgment, and isolation, she gave in. When Terrence came back promising change, Janelle chose hope over history. And that decision ended her life. Now, with the court proceedings behind them, everyone was left to pick up the broken pieces. Tamia's therapy sessions focused on memory, identity, and trauma. Week by week, she began to remember the things she had buried. The time Terrence told her that some girls are made for love earlier than others. The way he would sneak into her room at night and whisper that she wasn't like the rest. And the moment, her 14th birthday, when he gave her a necklace with a locket that said, "You're mine, forever." She wore that necklace the night her mother died. The therapists working with Tamia described her mind like a shattered puzzle. Each new truth made her question every memory she had ever formed. Was her first kiss real? Was her first, "I love you," even hers? Or were they all his? She stopped eating, started self-harming. And then one night, she carved something into her wrist with a broken plastic spoon. "I didn't know I was his." They found her before it was too late. But it was a wake-up call for everyone involved in her care. She wasn't healing. She was grieving a reality she never even knew she had. And just when things started to settle, the media struck again. A leaked interview with Terrence's cellmate was published in a major Florida newspaper. In it, the man claimed Terrence told him that there was another tape, one that had never been found. A final message. A goodbye video. From Janelle. In the interview, the cellmate said Terrence called it his get-out-of-jail-free card. But the police had never found that tape. Neither had the family. So was it real? Or just another one of Terrence's sick games? Denise begged authorities to search again. To tear through every unit, every drive, every old laptop, until it was found. It took 3 weeks. But finally, it surfaced. Tucked in the corner of an old storage locker in Liberty City, inside a pink plastic jewelry box that once belonged to Tamia. It was labeled, for her. If I'm gone. The tape was just under 5 minutes long. Janelle sat in her bedroom, camera on, no makeup, eyes swollen. She was crying before she even said a word. If you're watching this, it means something went wrong. Maybe I'm not here anymore. Maybe he did what I was always afraid he would do. I don't know. She took a deep breath. Tamia, I wanted to tell you everything. But how do you tell your child that the man she calls Dad is the same man who hurt you years before she was even born? I was 17 when I met Terrence. And I thought I loved him. I was pregnant before I even knew who he really was. She paused. I left him once. And I thought I'd never go back. But when you were 10, he came back around. Said he found God. Said he changed. I wanted you to have a father. I didn't want you to grow up with that same empty hole I had. Then she broke down completely. I should have protected you. I should have seen it sooner. I saw the way he looked at you. And instead of screaming, I stayed silent. Because I didn't want to believe the truth. She looked into the camera. I'm sorry, baby. I love you. And no matter what happens, none of this is your fault. The tape was played in court. Tamia watched it from her hospital bed. And for the first time since her mother's death, she cried. Real tears. Not for herself. But for the woman who died trying to save her, even if she waited too long. That tape rewrote the story again. It gave context. Painful, tragic, and honest. Janelle wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. Big ones. But she loved her daughter. Enough to try to shield her from a past too heavy to carry. Now, the public saw her not as a negligent mother, but as a woman cornered by the very system that failed to protect her. And Tamia? She was no longer a villain. She was a child trapped in a story that had been written before she could even hold a pen. But before this tale closes, one final twist still waits in the shadows. Because while Terrence was rotting behind bars, someone else had picked up his playbook. Someone who had been watching all along. We'll reveal who next. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you believe that the truth, no matter how ugly, is the first step to healing. 3 months after the trial, just as the dust had finally begun to settle, another call came into the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office. A teenage girl, 13 years old. She had walked into a school counselor's office, sat down, and whispered, "There's a man. He says I'm special. He says I remind him of someone named Tamia." The counselor didn't wait. She reported it immediately. The man's name? Deshaun Rivers. A 35-year-old youth mentor who had volunteered at 3 after-school programs across Miami. And more disturbingly, he was Terrence Jackson's younger cousin. Suddenly, everything exploded again. People had assumed that with Terrence locked away, the nightmare was over. But this new allegation showed something deeper, something worse. Terrence hadn't just been a predator. He had created a system. A network of men who watched, learned, who admired what he did and wanted to copy it. Earlier on, we saw how Terrence manipulated Tamia slowly, over years, with gifts, praise, and secrets. Now, investigators believed Deshaun was following the exact same script. The 13-year-old girl, whose name was withheld for privacy, revealed text messages, voice notes, even a handwritten card that read, "You're the kind of girl who grows up fast. That's not bad. That's power." When the girl was asked where he learned to say that, she said, "He told me his cousin taught him everything. He said Tamia was the first, but not the last." Detectives were horrified. Was this bigger than one man? Was there a culture forming? One hidden inside mentorship programs, schools, even churches, where predators used charm and authority to break down young girls. The investigation widened, and the more they dug, the more they uncovered. For more girls, all under 16, all approached by Deshaun Rivers, all given similar praise, similar gifts, similar lines. He had modeled himself after Terrence. But here's the part that shook everyone. One of the girls, 15 years old, said she had once visited Terrence while he was out on bail before the trial. Her mother thought it was a church group visit, but it was something else entirely. Terrence had been recruiting, even while under suspicion for murder, even while under investigation for abuse. He was planting seeds, coaching Deshaun, coaching others. And the terrifying part? He had almost succeeded. If not for that brave 13-year-old girl, no one would have known. No one would have asked. No one would have stopped Deshaun before it was too late. He was arrested on 6 counts of solicitation of a minor, with more charges pending. Tamia was informed in the psychiatric facility. She didn't speak, didn't blink. She simply whispered, "He said someone would take care of me if anything ever happened to him." That's when it hit the therapists. Terrence hadn't just controlled Tamia while he was free. He had programmed her to stay under control after he was gone. Planted backup plans. Reinforced the trauma. Ensured she would never truly escape. But this time, it didn't work. Because Tamia finally spoke. For the first time, she agreed to testify. She took the stand, this time as a witness, not a suspect. She described the way it started. The way it felt. The confusion. The guilt. The moments where love and fear blurred into one. And then she said something that made the entire courtroom fall silent. "He didn't just teach me to hurt others. He taught me to hurt myself. I lived by his rules for so long, I forgot how to have my own." It wasn't just testimony. It was a warning. To parents. To schools. To communities. That monsters don't always come in the night. Sometimes they come with a clipboard and a smile. The Deshaun case triggered a full review of the youth mentorship program that hired him. Over 60 applications were rescreened. 2 more staffers were removed. A hotline was launched for anonymous reports. And Tamia's voice had saved them all. Meanwhile, behind bars, Terrence was finally confronted with the truth. His system had been exposed. His cousin had confessed. And Tamia, the girl he thought he owned, had turned on him. One of the prison guards reported hearing him scream in his cell for hours. Breaking things. Smashing his food tray. And then silence. Days later, he was moved to solitary confinement after threatening another inmate who called him Daddy Dearest. But even then, he didn't stop writing. Guards discovered dozens of letters, hidden under his mattress, addressed to Tamia. Each one more disturbing than the last. In one he wrote, "You'll come back. They always do. You're mine. Even if the world forgets, you won't." None of the letters were delivered. They were locked away, sealed as evidence of his continuing obsession. Tamia, for her safety, was moved to a new facility in another state under a protection order. She started drawing. Started eating again. Started smiling, just barely. And then one day, she painted something the staff couldn't forget. A house on fire. But inside the flames, a girl walking away. Alive. Free. This story had started with a murder. But it was no longer about death. It was about survival. Tamia had been born into darkness, raised by lies, betrayed by the people who were supposed to love her. And somehow, she made it out. But the story isn't done yet. Because someone else, someone from the past, is about to step forward with a secret that changes everything. A person no one expected. One who saw the truth long ago. And stayed silent. Stick around. The world thought it had heard every twist in the Tamia Harris case. Terrence was behind bars. His cousin Deshaun had been caught copying his abuse playbook. And Tamia? She was finally getting the help she'd needed since she was a child. But then, another voice emerged from the shadows. One that had been silent for years. One no one had thought to question. It came in the form of a voicemail left on the Miami-Dade Victim Services line. A woman's voice. So nervous. Almost trembling. "I used to work with Janelle. I think I should have said something a long time ago. I saw what was happening, but I didn't want to get involved. I didn't think it was my place. But I knew. Her name was Ms. Gloria Barnes. She had been the assistant principal at Tamia's middle school. The one Janelle used to visit once a month when Tamia was in 6th grade, always worried, always tired. Back then, everyone chalked Tamia's behavior up to teenage hormones. The mood swings, the sudden outbursts, the constant clinging to her phone. But Gloria had seen something different. She saw the bruises. She saw the way Tamia flinched when touched unexpectedly. She saw Terrence once, parked outside the school, watching Tamia through the gates with a look no grown man should have when watching a child. Gloria called Janelle into her office after that. She told her, gently, that something didn't feel right. That Tamia might be going through more than just adolescence. But Janelle brushed it off. "She's just being dramatic," she said. "She's mad because I took her phone." But that wasn't the truth. Gloria knew it. She felt it. She let it go. Didn't report it. Didn't escalate. Because Terrence showed up at the school the next day. Smiling. And he told Gloria, "I take care of my girls. You don't need to worry about us." That's when Gloria made the worst decision of her career. She stayed out of it. And now, almost 5 years later, she was ready to confess. Her statement reopened an internal investigation at Tamia's middle school, revealing at least 3 more staff members who had suspected abuse but failed to file the proper reports. Teachers, coaches, even a school nurse. One of them had even written in Tamia's file, "May be experiencing issues at home." But no follow-up was ever made. The system didn't just fail Tamia. It ignored her. And it did what it often does to young black girls. It labeled her angry, difficult, instead of protecting her, it punished her. By now, Tamia's story had become the focus of a national movement. Advocates were calling for better trauma training in schools, mandatory abuse reporting, and specialized protection programs for at-risk children in minority communities. Janelle's story became a rallying cry. Not just as a victim, but as a mother trapped in a cycle of silence, secrecy, and shame. But amidst all this noise, this awakening, there was one more person who had yet to speak. Marcus. Tamia's younger brother. He had been 10 when his mother was murdered. Just a child. Shipped off to live with an aunt. Bounced between therapists. Moved to a different city under a new name to escape the media storm. But now, he was 13. And for the first time, he agreed to talk to investigators. What he said left everyone in the room frozen. "I saw him go in her room." "Who?" asked the detective. "Terrence," Marcus whispered. "Before Mom died. He used to go into Mia's room when she was asleep. He'd tell me not to tell. Said if I did, we'd all be taken away." The detective leaned in. "Why didn't you tell anyone back then?" Marcus wiped his eyes. "Tried. I told my teacher once. She said I must have had a bad dream." Another adult who didn't listen. Another missed chance to stop the nightmare. But Marcus remembered something else. Something that hadn't been in any police report. The night Janelle died, he heard her scream. But it wasn't Tamia's name she yelled. It was his. "Marcus. Go. Get out." She had tried to protect him, even in her final moments. And he ran. He left the house. Hid in the neighbor's shed. That's why he wasn't there when the police arrived. That's why they found Tamia alone with the body. That memory had been locked deep inside his mind, too painful to face. But now, it was part of the official record. It confirmed what Tamia had always feared but never said out loud. She didn't act alone. Terrence had been there. He struck first. She struck second. The hammer was a backup plan. But now, the law had a new dilemma. Could Terrence be tried again for his role in the actual murder? Could this new testimony prove that he was the one who killed Janelle, and that Tamia had simply finished what he started? Legal teams went back to the drawing board, and a grand jury was called to reopen the homicide investigation. But what they didn't expect was what Marcus handed over next. A journal. His own. He had kept it ever since that night. Page after page of drawings, memories, dreams. And one entry stood out. The night before the murder, Marcus had drawn a picture of his family. But he had scribbled something under Terrence's name. One word: devil. This wasn't just a broken home. It was a house built on fear. A place where secrets rotted in the walls and silence became a weapon. And even now, years later, the echoes still hadn't stopped. Tamia was informed of Marcus's memory. She broke down. And for the first time, she asked to speak to him. The reunion was quiet, supervised, cautious. They sat across from each other. Neither knew what to say. Until Marcus whispered, "I don't blame you." And Tamia replied, "I blame me enough for both of us." But in that moment, healing began. Not from forgiveness, but from finally knowing they weren't alone. That someone else had seen the same darkness and survived. But one question still lingered in the shadows. Why had Terrence kept calling Tamia his masterpiece? What was he building her for? What else had he planned? The final pieces of this puzzle are about to fall into place. Don't miss what's coming next. And if you've been affected by any part of this story, reach out. Speak up. Tell your truth. Because silence only feeds the monster. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this story if you believe in protecting children, before it's too late. The truth was nearly complete. Tamia had spoken. Marcus had remembered. The letters, the tapes, the patterns, all of it had painted a picture of a man who destroyed lives and called it love. But there was one question still burning. Why did Terrence call Tamia his masterpiece? What did he mean? Was it just manipulation? Or had he been planning something even darker? That answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a hard drive. Found inside a broken DVD player during a clean-out of Terrence's old garage, stacked between boxes of expired canned food and old VHS reels. Detectives had searched that property before. But this was hidden deep, inside the lining of a dismantled speaker box. It almost looked accidental, until they powered it on. The drive was encrypted. It took 4 days to crack. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, labeled with initials, dates, and most chillingly, titles. Some were named First Sleepover, Trust Building, Graduation Test. Each one contained a series of PDFs, videos, and Word documents. Grooming manuals, step-by-step instructions, scripts, dialogues, daily routines. It was a blueprint, a psychological warfare plan designed to break down girls between the ages of 11 and 16. The guide walked through isolation, gaslighting, shame tactics, dependency, and emotional reward systems. And in the folder labeled Teach, Tamia's initials, they found something that made even the most hardened detectives walk away from their desks. A video file titled Initiation. It was a mock scenario, acted out by Terrence and Tamia. She was barely 13. Her voice high, unsure. He coached her through lines. If anyone asks, I wanted it. He saved me. I don't need my mom. I need him. These weren't just words. They were rehearsals. He was training her to defend him if ever questioned. And then came the final file in her folder. Phase 3, Loyalty Test. The document outlined a chilling plan. Tamia would be asked to do something irreversible, a final act of love, to prove she would always choose Terrence over her mother. It didn't say what the act was. But we already know how that night ended. This wasn't just grooming. It was programming. Tamia was his masterpiece because she was the perfect result of his design. She wasn't just a victim. She was his weapon. The court reopened the case for homicide conspiracy. Terrence was charged again, this time with premeditated orchestration of murder through psychological coercion. A charge rarely used, but one that fit perfectly. It was clear now, Janelle didn't die in a sudden act of rage. She died in a finale that had been planned for years. Back in the psychiatric facility, Tamia was told the full truth. The hard drive, the documents, the recordings. For a long time, she sat frozen. Then she whispered, I thought I was saving him, but I was just finishing the job he started. For the first time, her doctors considered that Tamia might have something even deeper than trauma. She had been psychologically engineered. Her thoughts weren't her own. Her decisions, every one of them, had been shaped by years of abuse dressed up as devotion. Now the story reached national headlines again. News outlets ran with it. Florida predator built a monster, using his own daughter. Tamia wasn't just groomed, she was programmed. But not everyone saw Tamia as innocent. Social media split into two camps. One side called her a victim, a child soldier in a war she never signed up for. The other side said, she still held the hammer. So who's right? That question was debated endlessly. On TV, in court, at kitchen tables. But what everyone agreed on, Terrence was no longer just a predator. He was the blueprint of a new kind of evil. One that didn't strike fast, but one that planned, molded, controlled, and even when locked away, still reached into lives. Then came the unexpected moment that closed the circle. Terrence, now facing his second life sentence, finally broke. Not in court, not to a lawyer, but in a handwritten letter, mailed to the judge 3 months after his final trial. She was mine. I built her. I gave her purpose. The world wanted her to be nothing. I made her special. The rest of you? You broke her. Not me. And if I had the chance, I'd do it all again. The courtroom fell silent when the letter was read aloud. The judge didn't respond with words. She simply extended his solitary confinement to permanent. No contact with anyone. No mail in or out. Terrence Jackson would die alone. And Tamia? After years of courtrooms, therapy, and silence, she began speaking. Not just to her doctors, but to other girls. She joined a survivor advocacy group under an alias. Wrote her story under the name T. She told them the truth no one wanted to hear. That monsters can raise you, and you'll still love them, but that doesn't make them any less monsters. And you don't owe them your silence. In the final court hearing, where the last of the charges were processed, Tamia asked to make a statement. It was short. She stood up, looked the judge in the eye, and said, "He built me for pain. But I choose something else now. I choose to rebuild." She turned to Marcus. He smiled. She turned to Denise. She nodded. She turned to the empty chair where her mother would have sat, and whispered, "Thank you." And then she walked out. Not into freedom, not yet, but into a new life. One where she got to decide who she became. One where her story wasn't written by fear anymore. The girl who was once a weapon was finally becoming a survivor. But one final question remains. If Terrence could build one Tamia, how many others are still out there? Waiting, listening, breaking. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this story if you believe the next Tamia doesn't have to be a victim. If you believe cycles can be broken. If you believe monsters can be stopped. It came in a whisper. In a quiet courtroom. In front of a judge. With no reporters, no cameras, no spotlight. 3 years had passed since Janelle Harris was murdered in her living room. Since Tamia, just 16 at the time, stood over her mother's lifeless body, clutching a hammer she was trained to use. Since Terrence Jackson, her abuser, and her biological father, was exposed for the manipulative predator he truly was. Tamia was now 19. No longer a child. But not yet free. She had spent the past 3 years in a secured psychiatric rehabilitation facility, working through trauma most people could never even comprehend. She had gone from silent and unresponsive to writing, speaking, painting, and mentoring other survivors. She had learned to separate her thoughts from Terrence's voice. And most importantly, she learned to forgive herself. But today she was back in court. Not as a suspect. Not as a witness. But as a young woman asking for her life back. Tamia's lawyers filed for early release from psychiatric care, backed by her doctors and the facility's director. Their argument was clear. Tamia had made more progress than anyone expected. She had shown remorse, insight, empathy, growth, and above all, she was no longer a danger to herself or anyone else. The prosecutor, once one of her harshest critics, said this on the record. What happened to Tamia Harris was evil beyond words. But what she's done since is a testament to human resilience. She deserves a chance. Still, not everyone agreed. In the back row sat a small group of protesters, family friends of Janelle, community members who had never forgiven Tamia for what she did. They held signs that read, "She still took a life. Justice for Janelle." And then the judge spoke. She looked directly at Tamia and said, "This courtroom has seen many things, but it's rare to see a case where the victim was also the weapon, and somehow the survivor." She paused. "Ms. Harris, I am granting your release. But let me be clear, this is not freedom. This is responsibility." Tamia didn't cry. She simply nodded, and walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight for the first time in 3 years. No applause. No celebration. Just quiet steps into a world she was finally ready to face. She was placed under a supervised living program with therapy, community service, and mandatory public speaking engagements. Not as punishment, but as prevention, because the state wanted her to use her voice, to teach, to warn, to stop the next girl from being turned into someone else's weapon. Tamia accepted the role, not out of guilt, but because she knew her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every child who had been touched too soon, every girl called fast for being abused, every mother who didn't see the signs until it was too late. She began visiting schools, detention centers, churches, telling her story not for pity, but for protection. She stood in front of classrooms and said, "I thought love meant secrets. I thought obedience was the same as devotion. I thought pain was my purpose. And I was wrong." Teenagers listened. Some cried. Some came up after and whispered their own stories. And one day, a girl passed her a folded note that read, "He says I'm special too. What do I do?" Tamia didn't even blink. She helped the girl report it. That girl was saved, before it could become another case file. Another Tamia. Another coffin. This was her redemption. Not by forgetting what happened, but by turning the ashes into armor. As for Marcus, he thrived. He stayed with Denise, who raised him like her own. He played football, joined the honor roll, and eventually became the face of a youth outreach program called Break the Silence. He still saw Tamia. And over time, he stopped flinching when her name came up. They laughed sometimes, cried other times, but they healed. Together. And Terrence? He died in prison 2 years later. Heart failure. No visitors. No obituary. Just a small bag of property and a name no one would say out loud. But even in death, his impact lingered. Other men like him still existed. Still operated. Still smiled in front of classrooms and claimed they were helping girls. Tamia made it her mission to find them, to expose them, to save the girls who hadn't been saved yet. And she never picked up another paintbrush without remembering the one she painted at 17. A house on fire. A girl walking away. Alive. Free. Forgiven. We often think of evil as something loud. Gunshots. Screams. Sirens. But sometimes it's quiet. A soft voice. A bedtime story. A secret too heavy for a child to carry. This story wasn't just about murder. It was about silence. And how speaking out, no matter how late, can stop the cycle. So now we ask you, dear viewer, what would you have done if you were Tamia? Would you have seen the signs? Would you have stopped it? Or would you have been too late? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you or reminded you of someone you know, like it, comment on it, share it, speak it, because the next Tamia is already out there. And she needs you to listen.